So we are being recorded, and it will be available on the conference platform 1 hour after the session ends. We want to hear from you in the chat. You will be using the conference chat. Zoom chat has been disabled. Feel free to ask any questions or comment in the chat box on the conference platform. We recommend using the conference platform chat feature because that chat will be recorded with the session. The Zoom chat does not get recorded. Please keep yourself muted unless the presenter asks you otherwise. And I am excited to introduce you to Vanessa Lohf.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. As Lori said, my name is Vanessa Lohf, and I am currently a program specialist at the Wichita State University Center for Public Health Initiatives, and I facilitate a team of folks at the WSU Community Engagement Institute that are focused on supporting trauma-informed systems of care. I've also been a social worker for more than 30 years, and I really hate to admit that out loud because it ages me. But during that time, I've worked directly with people of all ages and all abilities. I even spent a couple of years as a manager for Early Head Start here in Wichita. So I've managed home visitors and have been a home visitor myself. And I've spent the vast majority of my adult life helping individuals, organizations, and systems better understand the impacts of our experiences, whether those are positive or negative, on our health and well-being. So I'm super excited for the opportunity to help begin shifting our perspectives away from focusing what's wrong in people and systems to discovering what's strong within them. And I thank you for joining me on that learning journey today. So I am so excited. I think, wow, right now it says there are 81 of you here today. So thank you for you all taking the time to hang out with me this afternoon. So today I'm going to review a few concepts related to adversity and trauma related to ACEs. I won't get deep into that, but I want to talk about how those contribute to how we think about what we see and hear. And then we're going to discuss the latest science around the impacts of positive experiences and introduce you to a framework that you can use to create those moments of what we call hope in your everyday interactions. So something I want to acknowledge before we get started is that some of you may have lived experience with adverse childhood experiences or vicarious trauma. And maybe you've had a really long day of learning already. So we're going to be talking a lot about resilience in this session, which will also include some conversations about trauma. Some of us find when we're doing the work, when we're in it, we're working with families, we have really high thresholds for what we see and hear, and we're able to manage strong emotions and thoughts because that's our job. So we've trained ourselves to be able to do that. But when we're away from the actual doing of the work and we're thinking or reflecting about it from a different perspective, sometimes those thoughts and feelings can kind of wash over us, kind of like being in the ocean with your back turned and a wave hits you from behind. It feels totally different than when we're in work mode. So if that happens for you, I encourage you to do what you need to do to take care of yourself. Please feel free to stand up and stretch, step away if you need to reset. You're not going to bother me at all. You're not required to have your cameras on. You may, but you don't have to. So if you feel more comfortable and feel like you can focus more without it, please feel free to do that. Otherwise, I love to see everybody's faces and see who's here. So you do what's most comfortable for you. I'm going to start us off with an activity. So I do need you all to please make sure that you can see your screen, that you have access to the Whova app, because I'm going to be asking you to interact with me. And I'm going to back this up a little bit because my timer got started without me. But for the next 30 seconds, I'd like you to look closely at the image on your screen and then drop in the chat what you see. So what stands out to you from this picture? So if you have access to the Whova chat, just type in there, what do you see in this picture? So individuals are in the same room, but they're not interacting. The floor is cluttered with lots of stuff. There's food, bugs and cleaning supplies within reach. There's a baby on the floor near the outlet. Nobody paying attention to each other. People and pets. There's a lit cigarette. TV's on. Lots of safety hazards. Babies are in a safe place. Mom is disengaged. A lot of chaos with no one noticing. Very good. Okay. Kids are fed. There's food, holes in the walls. Wonderful. That's about 30 seconds. Feel free to drop in anything else that you notice. So my next question for you is, which was easier for you to notice? The risk factors in the house or the protective factors? Or was it about the same? So yeah, some of you say it was about the same. Many of you are saying it was easier to spot the risk factors. So I did notice in the chat, some of you were pointing out those protective factors. So I'm going to back my slides up so that you can look at this picture again. But some of you noticed faith appears to be important to them. They are all in the same room. They may not be interacting with each other, but they are all in the same room. There are lots of books in this space. Mom appears to have her hand on a book. So she maybe was reading, but there are insects there. With the cleaning supplies, it's possible they either just got done cleaning or they're preparing to clean that day. So part of this is going to be on the perspective that you take, right? And I'm noticing a lot of you are saying in the chat that the risk factors maybe were the easiest thing for you to spot. And for some of you, it was about the same between risk factors and protective factors. For most of us, a great deal of time is spent learning how to spot those risk factors, right? I mean, that's what a lot of our training is about, is how to notice that kind of stuff and to notice the individual and the community situations. And then we're also trained to quickly decide what might be needed to reduce those risks. So my hope for our time together today is to help you begin the process of learning to see positive factors just as quickly and easily as we see the negative. And to do that, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between what's called type 1 and type 2 thinking. So type 1 thinking is very fast and intuitive. A lot of you, when I said go, man, you were on it, right? It takes very little effort and it's embedded in most of our daily activities and often happens without us even realizing. So an example would be what happens when you're driving home after a trip to the grocery store. You don't necessarily think about which route you're going to take unless there's a barrier in the way, like road or sidewalk construction that causes you to slow down and think differently. Type 1 thinking is rooted in our lived experience, and it's supported by the years of training that some of you have, and it's necessary for our survival and protection when there's an immediate danger. If there's a problem, we don't want to wait and just slow down and think through it. We need to keep ourselves safe. Our brain is wired that way. But this type of thinking is also laden with implicit biases that we all hold, positive or negative, about the people and the world around us. And that can lead us to making assumptions that aren't accurate and cause us to have some snap reactions to differences that we might perceive. But on the other hand, type 2 thinking is slow, calculating, conscious thought. It's the type of thinking that we use when we're trying to solve a problem or when we're learning something new, and it takes a whole lot more effort than type 1 thinking. This slower type 2 thinking allows us to notice our biases, to see people and situations differently, and to take on the perspective of that other person, which is key to expressing empathy. It also allows us to consciously focus on strengths and what's unique about the person and their situation, rather than making snap judgments and decisions based on just risks and challenges. So for most of us, finding the risk factors in the picture that we looked at involved type 1 thinking. I know the first time I did this as a social worker, man, I was all over the bugs and the cleaning supplies and all of that. But the protective factors takes more type 2 thinking. So with practice, finding and asking about protective factors and assets can also become natural and automatic, just like when we're looking for risks in the environments that we're in. Now, I want to pause here for a second, and I want to make it super clear. I'm not suggesting that you don't screen for potential risk factors. I was a child welfare worker. I am not suggesting that at all. And I'm guessing that it's part of your role to identify the challenges that your families might be facing so that you can connect them to resources. Because most of the time when families come to you, they're not coming to you because everything's going wonderful, right? They're coming to you because they're having a tough time often. But leading with people's strengths makes it easier to have hard conversations about challenges when you need to, because the person understands that you see all of them. So I am suggesting that you work to see the whole picture, not just what's wrong in the family. Because allowing ourselves to use that strengths-based lens can deepen our relationship with others. And by taking some time to learn more about HOPE, which stands for Healthy Outcomes from Positive Experiences, you're becoming part of a movement in the country that seeks to change the way providers interact with the people that they serve and how they deliver care. This approach seeks active engagement with families, and it works to avoid perpetuating some of those racist and inequitable systems that we often encounter and our families often encounter. This hopeful vision is one of a world that recognizes, honors, and fosters positive experiences because they're fundamental to people's health and well-being. HOPE is grounded on the core assumption of the science of the positive from Jeff Linkenbach at the Montana Institute, which states that the positive exists, it's real, and it's worth growing. We know that positive experiences promote kids' health and well-being, It allows children to form strong relationships and connections. They cultivate positive self-image and self-worth. And they provide a sense of belonging while building skills that promote resilience. However, a lot of our healthcare and social service systems are designed to focus on the negative. And often the screening tools that we use in our programs not only codify that implicit bias, but they also create a presumption of deficit by only focusing on the challenges that people face. And I was a parent of a child with special needs, and I know that anytime I wanted to access services, I had to tell those folks everything that my kid could not do, right? Can he roll over? Nope. Can he talk? Nope. Can he eat with utensils? Nope. And in order to get services, I had to tell all of that, which isn't terribly uplifting to a person, to a parent in particular, when you have a kid with special healthcare needs and they're not able to do the things that other kids do. But that's the only way I could get services. So hope is a process that we hope shifts the narrative so that people are defined by their strengths as well as the challenges that they face. What we know is that giving equal attention to the positive allows us to provide unbiased, empathetic care while helping to keep us out of blame and judgment, which is so hard because it's so much easier to blame families for their situations or to judge them for their situations. But if we stay out of that blame and judgment, that helps us to build trust between clients, communities, and providers because we're building on their individual, family, and community strengths to improve well-being. So I want to talk about how positive childhood experiences can help create kind of a revised definition of health and how they protect adult mental health as well. But before I do, there's a poll in your Whova space. Some of you have already taken it, so thank you so much for that. But I'd like to know, how much do you already know about positive childhood experiences? So thank you. I'm going to let you all vote for a second. I'm going to take a sip of water. I can see that you're actively voting right now, so that's super fun to watch. And I'm going to share the poll results. I'll give you a couple more seconds to let you all vote. That's so awesome. So what I see is that for the most part, some of you will say more than a little, but you probably have a lot to learn. Some of you say you've heard the words before. And there's a few of you that are like, I don't know, what is that? And others that maybe say that they're well-versed in PCEs and their effects on health. And no matter where you are, I want you to be contributing to these conversations today. So thank you so much for engaging in that particular poll. And hopefully I can get rid of that. There we go. So I want to introduce to you the recent science that's the driving force behind the HOPE movement. And we're going to talk about ACEs in a little bit, but you all know that there's science behind that. Now we've got science about positive childhood experiences. So let me give you a little bit of background. In 2015, a group of researchers from the Montana Institute that I mentioned earlier, Jeff Linkenbach, and folks from the Hope National Resource Center in Boston sought to better understand how positive childhood experiences correlated with adult mental health. So the focus at that time was adult mental health. And at that time, the team added 7 questions about different types of positive childhood experiences to the Wisconsin Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System Survey. There's a lot of words there. We call it the BRFSS, or BRFS is what some of us in public health call it. So the BRFS survey is a telephone survey conducted in all 50 states by the CDC, actually, through the state health departments. And they collect data from US residents regarding their health-related risk behaviors and chronic health conditions. So it's about a 20-minute phone survey where they ask you how many vegetables you eat, how much exercise you get, whether you drink or smoke. And about actually all 50 states have also included questions about ACEs in at least 1 year of their BRFS survey. We do this in Kansas. There are 8 of the 10 ACEs questions that have been asked in our BRFS survey 3 times since 2015. But Wisconsin was the first state to add questions about positive childhood experiences. So before I share the outcome of that survey, I want to give you some caveats. That Wisconsin is a predominantly white state, so it's important to know that as we look at the results. And so the data that they collected isn't necessarily culturally representative of the US as a whole. But here's the thing. The data is now also being collected in a handful of other states, including Kansas. So we are one of the first states in the country to be asking these questions of Kansas residents. And the hope is that that will expand the diversity of the sample and help us better understand the impacts of positive childhood experiences on overall adult health, not just mental health. So the Wisconsin survey, the original 2015 survey, asked adults who participated these 7 questions related to their childhood experiences. So whether they recalled these kinds of experiences. And if they chose often or very often on a 5-point scale, they got a point. So the questions were, how often did you feel able to talk to your family about feelings? How often did you feel your family stood by you during difficult times? How often did you enjoy participating in community traditions or feel a sense of belonging in high school and supported by friends? How often did you have at least 2 non-parent adults who took a genuine interest in you? And how often did you feel safe and protected by an adult in your home? So these are the 7 questions that were asked in 2015 and have been asked in the Kansas BRFS survey just in 2020. What they found in 2015 was that positive childhood experiences protect future adult mental health in what we call a dose-dependent way. And what I mean by that is the more positive childhood experiences the person recalled, the lower the odds became of that person reporting poor mental health as an adult. So only about half of the respondents who recalled 1 or 2 PCEs reported positive mental health in adulthood. And that number steadily rose as the number of positive experiences increased, with almost 90% of those recalling 6 or 7 positive childhood experiences reporting positive mental health. Now, I'm guessing that's not shocking to anybody, that if you have good positive experiences as a kid, maybe you're going to have better mental health as an adult, right? It gets better, so hang on. Since that original study was published, We've got additional data from Wisconsin, Montana, South Carolina, and Kansas. And that data are showing that people who report more positive childhood experiences are also more likely to be employed, achieve higher education levels, and have higher household incomes. And in Tennessee, those higher positive experiences are also associated with lower rates of depression and lower rates of heart disease. So we're seeing some additional stuff coming out of this data. So here's the next bit. In 2019, so just 4 years ago, they collected data in Montana that showed that the more PCEs an adult recalled, so around the 6 or 7, the lower the likelihood that they used any sort of substances in their lifetime. So individuals reporting the highest levels of PCEs, the 6 or 7, had a 68% reduced risk of having ever been a cigarette smoker compared to those who reported having experienced lower levels of PCEs. And of those 7, there were 3 PCEs in particular that seemed to have the biggest impact. The first was feeling my family stood by me during difficult times. With that one, it said 46% reduced risk of having been a cigarette smoker. Feeling safe and protected by an adult in my home showed a 45% reduced risk. And enjoying participating in community traditions showed a 42% reduced risk, which is one that I might not have picked up on. And while all 7 of them were relevant, feeling safe and protected by an adult in the home had the largest impact on alcohol use. And individuals who experienced the most PCEs, 6 or 7, reported 71% lower odds of lifetime substance use, including things like cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and other sedatives, compared to those folks that reported the lowest level of PCEs. So that's pretty impressive. In my opinion, that's pretty impressive, right? So before I get to the even more impressive pieces of the study, I'm going to pause here for just a moment to do a quick review of the impacts of ACEs, so we have something to compare it to. So there's another poll in HOPE that some of you have already engaged in related to how much do you already know about ACEs. And I have a suspicion I know what this is going to be, but if you wouldn't mind going to, I hope you can vote, and tell me what you know about ACEs already. It may not let you vote again. There we go. So what do you already know about ACEs? What I'm noticing is that there are a handful of you that have heard of it, but you're not terribly sure what it is. Many of you, if you've been a home visitor for quite a while, it's hard for you not to know what ACEs are, because it's kind of the foundation of a lot of the work that you're doing, at least in my experience. A couple of you say you're experts. That's great. So if I mess up, let me know, because I am not an expert in anything. So please feel free to let me know. Awesome. You're doing great. And I see some of you are also typing your answers into the chat because the polls aren't working. Thank you for that. So I'm not going to get deep into ACEs today, but I am going to give us a refresher because hopefully y'all have slept since the last time you talked about this, just to give us some context. So the 2015 PCE study had about 6,000 people who participated. The original 1998 ACEs study, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, that was done by Doctors Vincent Felitti and Robert Anda, compared survey results from over 17,000 employed, mostly white, college-educated folks with insurance. So that ACE study was not necessarily focused on the same kinds of folks that you work with. The survey, the ACEs survey, gauged current mental and physical health and tied adverse childhood experiences to negative health outcomes in adulthood. Those adverse childhood experiences fell into 3 general groups: child abuse, child neglect, and household challenges. So you can see here that child abuse includes physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Neglect includes physical and emotional neglect. And household challenges are based on items like living with an adult experiencing mental illness, witnessing your mother being treated violently, parental divorce, having an incarcerated relative, or living with an adult in the home who has a substance use disorder. So each of these 10 kinds of experiences is labeled an adverse childhood experience. And a person's ACE score simply reflects how many of these kinds of experiences a person had before they turned 18. So for example, if as an adult, I remember that I was emotionally neglected and mom had a substance use disorder, there would be an ACE score of 2. And ACE screening is becoming more and more prevalent across the country, especially on the West Coast, as a way to screen for childhood trauma. Some of your programs may actually do ACE screening with families to kind of open that conversation to help parents understand how their experiences impact their present, and how you can talk about prevention with the kiddos that they have in their home. So lots of folks are screening now. To be honest, we try to be careful who we recommend does screening because it's not always helpful. Sometimes it can do more harm than good. So we try to balance that. But further research into ACEs has discovered that long-term health effects also are associated with other adversity like bullying, community violence, natural disasters, refugee or wartime experiences, or witnessing or experiencing acts of terrorism. So ACEs, the general gist of that study was that ACEs are strongly correlated with long-lasting physical and mental health issues and societal impacts that range from depression and anxiety to substance use, diabetes, Alzheimer's, unplanned pregnancies, and lower average annual incomes and issues related to employment. But we also now know that broader social and community issues also contribute to ACEs. So what you see on the screen here is kind of an expanded idea of ACEs that includes social effects. On the bottom there, we call those adverse community environments. And that includes things like poverty, institutional racism, historical trauma, the effects of war and migration, and neighborhood effects, and sees those as kind of the root of most ACEs and in and of themselves as adverse childhood experiences. So they call that the pair of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences and adverse community environments. And that understanding of ACEs takes into account the reality that a lot of ACE scores result from systemic and institutional factors such as racism that are outside the control of the individual family. So if you think about one of the official ACEs is living with an incarcerated relative. The number of kids with that experience is actually more likely a reflection of the mass incarceration of young Black and brown men in the United States. So while having an incarcerated parent would give a child an ACE score of 1, the root of that score can be attributed to institutional racism more than it's attributed to a deficit in that particular family. There's been additional work, as you can see here, that we're also starting to take into account a third realm of adverse climate environments and recognizing the impact of the climate crisis and things like natural disasters and the impacts that those have on the soil of the community where those individual experiences come from. So unfortunately, we have a couple of very recent, very glaring examples of this. The wildfires in Maui are going to have a long-term impact. We've had wildfires in Kansas in the last few years that are going to have a long-term impact on those communities. The pandemic, now the pandemic was on this graphic before there was COVID. Pandemics have a long, and we all know, we've all lived through the last 3 years of what a pandemic, what that impact can be on physical and mental health. So now that I've kind of got us down in the gloomy and refreshed your memory about the impacts of ACEs, I want to talk about why that's important to our discussion of positive childhood experiences. So back in that 2015 study that I was talking about, the team also found that the protective nature of positive childhood experiences remains even in the face of adversity. So as you can see from the graph on your screen, in those adults who recalled or who reported having an ACE score of 4 or more, which is pretty high, it's considered to be high, the rate of adult depression or poor mental health outcomes still went down the more positive experiences they were exposed to. So if they had an ACE score of 4 or more and a PCE score of 5 or more, the rates of depression still went down. So the bottom line is, from this research, what we're learning is that positive childhood experiences buffer against the negative lifelong health effects caused by exposure to ACEs. But that's not all. Here's the really interesting part. The research also confirmed that having a low ACE score doesn't mean that life is all rainbows and unicorns. Multiple research articles are showing that the absence of positive childhood experiences results in a more dramatic negative shift in adult health than the presence of ACEs. So let me say that a different way. Let's say you have an ACE score of 0 or 1, but you also have a PCE score of 0. The negative impact may be even greater than having a higher ACE score alone. Now, the reason for that is still under investigation, but it might be because positive childhood experiences positively influence the biology involved in the stress response by both disrupting the toxic stress cycle brought on by ACEs, as well as supporting the body's ability to manage regular life stressors, regardless of what your ACE score is. So I want to let this sink in for just a minute. Positive childhood experiences protect adult health even in the face of ACEs. And their absence may do even more harm to long-term health than having experienced adversity. So in the chat, what I'd like to do is hear more about what that might mean for you. And Kelsey, thank you for your question. Put in the chat, I want you to think about, what does this mean for you and your work? If positive childhood experiences can prevent bad things from happening, can prevent poor outcomes, even in the face of ACEs. Kelsey, I see your question about what if someone has an A score of 9 and a PCE score of 2. Of course, the individual results are going to vary. It's going to depend on what kind of support that they've had, and what kind of resources that they have had since. So it's hard for me to predict, because ACEs don't cause health concerns. It increases the risk. So there's going to be lots of other factors that are going to be pulled into that. And thank you for asking the question. So I'm looking at, I'm sorry, I'm not looking at you, I'm looking at the chat, and I'm seeing some of your responses that for some of you, what this means for you and your work is that you can remind the parents of all the good they can do when they're providing support. Chelsea says she feels a greater sense of helpfulness, that we can control the increase of positive experiences more than you can control the prevention of ACEs. Couldn't have said that better. It provides hope and can motivate families to be intentional. You can make parents more aware. It means that you can do this, right? It's important to highlight the strengths and positive experiences that parents have experienced and give them an outline of what's important to provide for their children. That's right. You all got it. You're getting it. Home visitors always get this stuff. Usually you're the first ones before other people start jumping on the bandwagon. The home visitors have this figured out. You may not be able to prevent bad things from happening in these families. You're coming to them at a time where a lot of this stuff's already happened, but you can always promote positive experiences. And that's where we're going to spend the rest of our time together. I want to give you some more concrete information about what I mean when I say positive childhood experiences. So the HOPE framework consists of 4 evidence-based building blocks that describe the types of key positive childhood experiences that are critical for healthy development. Now, this framework was developed and described by Dr. Charlene Harper-Brown and Dr. Robert Sege from the HOPE National Resource Center in a paper that they published in Academic Pediatrics in 2015. So that's the other thing, you know, that ACEs science is 25 years old now. This science is 5 years old. And in their paper, Dr. Harper-Brown and Dr. Sege went through all of the strengths-based models that you all probably are already aware of. Some of us have been around long enough to remember the 40 developmental assets. And there's the strengthening families protective factors, and all kinds of models out there focused on strengths-based kind of information. And they went through all of that science, all of that work, and distilled it down into these 4 broad categories. So when you see this, you're probably going to say, this isn't rocket science, this is what we've been doing. But so I want to make sure that you understand that I know that, but this may give us a different way to talk about it. And so the 4 building blocks are relationships, environments, engagement, and opportunities for social emotional development. Now, what we know is that adverse experiences can disrupt access to positive experiences throughout the lifespan. And I don't know about you all, but this language, when I first heard it, I was like, oh my gosh, this makes so much more sense if I talk about it this way, and it takes some of the pressure off. So, for example, abuse and other types of violence disrupts access to the first two building blocks, relationships and safe environments. When there's a family disruption, that disrupts access to a safe environment. So when we see a person holistically, we can start to see how their adverse experiences, no matter how old they are, might be preventing them from having access to positive experiences in certain areas of their lives. So as practitioners, as home visitors, you can work to increase a child and family's access to those building blocks where they might have experienced that disruption. And when I say this kind of takes the pressure off, if I'm creating access, that means I don't have to be the one to do it all the time. Because I know when I was doing home visiting, I felt like I had to be everything to everybody. And if we're just creating access, that means we can capitalize on the village approach, right? So as I go forward in the last little while we have together here, I want to emphasize that it isn't just children who need these building blocks. Our brains continue to need access to the 4 building blocks throughout our lifetime. So it's important to incorporate those multi-generational approaches. We can't ask parents to give to their children what they didn't get themselves. So as you work to strengthen families, I'm asking you to prioritize connecting the caregivers and their kids to the 4 building blocks in ways that feel meaningful to that family. So I'm going to get deeper into the building block, and I'm going to be asking you some questions along the way. So have your keyboard ready to type in the chat. Building block number 1 is likely no surprise to anybody because it emphasizes the importance of nurturing supportive relationships. And frankly, that's pretty much what your whole job is, right? So early secure attachments, like the bond between a mom and a baby, or a parent and a baby, not just mom, are critically important to healthy development. But kids also need to have supportive relationships outside of their parents and caretakers, with other adults, and also with their peers. So for the families that you work with, this building block could look like establishing positive relationships with you or other healthcare and social service professionals. But part of your work may also include introducing your clients to community resources that allow them to build natural support networks by connecting them with other families who share similar likes or life circumstances. For some of you, that might include the parenting classes and play groups that your organizations host. So I'd like you to take a minute and type in the chat one way that you help your clients access positive relationships. And I want you to think beyond talking to families, because we all do that. But think about what you actually do to create that access to healthy relationships. So just pop in the chat one thing that you do in your work to help families access healthy relationships. You all are thinking. I'm going to give you a chance to think. Think about your conversations with families. What do you do? Not just what do you say. What do you do to help create access to those relationships? Let's see. My system's taking a little while to get caught up, I think. What kinds of things do you do? Not just say, but what do you do? Do you have play groups? Do you have certain places you refer? I'm going to do a little refresh and see if my system is not telling me things. There we are. So you connect folks to support groups, family nights for your families, planned group events, opportunities to get together through Tinder plays. Nice. Socialization activities. Mariana, I love what you just said. You show up. Yeah, you're part of that. You can count yourself in creating access for that. Showing up, being genuine. Love rituals. Discuss who their supports are. Doing eco maps, right? Inviting those parents to come together. See, I knew my system. I've been around home visitors about 25 years. I knew that you were answering me and my system just wasn't telling me. A women's group. Creating events where the family can do a craft together, family nights, informal parent support groups in the community, empower hours. Oh, wow, where the family shows something from their culture, or they show other families an activity. That's awesome. See, you guys are good at this. You're doing great. Please feel free to continue. I'm going to move on to the next building block because I want to hear more stuff. So the second building block is focused on safe, stable, protective, and equitable environments in which to live, play, and learn, both inside and outside of the home. And so this building block might include things like a safe, stable living environment that's secure in meeting the child and family's basic needs like food, shelter, healthcare. It might also look like a nurturing home or learning environment where kids and their grown-ups are emotionally secure, in an environment where they can safely express their thoughts and feelings, that it's okay to be mad sometimes. It's okay to say that I'm frustrated. It's okay to have a fit every once in a while. It might also look like a stable school or childcare environment where kids feel valued and receive high quality education. And for the adults, it might look like a safe work environment where they have access to opportunities for knowledge and skill development. It might also be a community environment, which you guys are talking about creating, where people can engage in cultural and recreational activities and interact with other people out in the community safely and equitably. So I'm curious, what do you all currently do to promote safe, stable, nurturing environments? Now I know to refresh my stuff so that I can see what you're doing. What are you doing to create those environments? Feel free to type those in the chat. Provide safe play spaces. Good. That you talk about the importance of identifying and validating feelings, and we're going to talk more about that in just a second. It might look like those physical environments and making sure that those are safe, connecting parents with or connecting the adults with safe spaces where they can do the same? Very good. Keep thinking about that one, because that one might feel a little harder to you. And I'm going to go to the next one. Now, all of us need to feel like we belong and that we matter to the people and communities around us. And this idea that we're part of something bigger than ourselves can help us to create a sense of purpose and mattering. And that's the focus of building block number 3. So many of you may be familiar with researcher and author Brene Brown, but Brene talks about belonging in this way. Fitting in means that you accept me as you are. Fitting in means that you accept me when I think and act like you do. But belonging means that you accept me as I am. So what we want for our families is that they belong and that they feel connected. So social and civic engagement can look like being involved in group projects, maybe some peer mentoring, engaging in community service through the kids' school or child care center or their church or community clubs. It could be partaking in family and community cultural traditions. It could be participating in organized community activities like dance or soccer. And those kinds of activities also help with building self-regulation skills. So it's not just that. So in your role, you can encourage participation in community cultural traditions and events like farmers markets or festivals. I was in Independence last week, and I know Neowalla is a thing there. There's the Taste of Newton up in Newton, or there's resource, community-wide resource fairs, those kinds of things. But you can also invite the families that you serve to provide feedback on your organization's programs and services, or advocate for those families that you work with to share their lived experiences with other government, civic, and social service organizations to make sure that those folks feel valued, that their voices are heard, and that their needs are getting met. So I'm curious, what do you do? What do you do? Not say, what do you do to encourage your families to be engaged in their community or in your organization or with other families? Jesse, thank you for contributing to that concept of mattering, and not just belonging, but that they matter. Yeah, thank you for that. That's beautiful. And mattering has, it's not just about belonging. It's that they matter to the people around them. That's absolutely right. Thank you for contributing that. It's beautiful. And that difference between fitting in and belonging is a big one too. You're encouraging peer support in prenatal classes. Thanks, Mariana. So I hope, even if you're not responding in the chat, I hope you're thinking about, what do we do to help promote these building blocks? The fourth, and keep putting the stuff in there, parent community meetings and policy council. So I can tell by that language that you might be, Leah, from a Head Start program. And so absolutely, those are exactly the kinds of things that we're talking about. Community coalitions. I spent this morning in the Wichita Child Abuse Prevention Coalition, and we had 3 parents with lived experience there. It was awesome. So encouraging them to share their story with others so that people get hear those stories. So thanks, Leah. Early Head Start, that's my jam right there. So thanks for chiming in. That fourth and final building block is focused on opportunities for social and emotional development. Kids and adults need to develop social and emotional competencies that allow them to constructively navigate adversity and challenges, because they're going to happen. For kids, that often happens through unstructured playtime with their peers. That's where they learn to share and get along. But it also occurs through those interactions with adults. And some of you named that in the chat. But those adult interactions that can help them identify and name their emotions and model appropriate reactions to challenges. But frankly, in some ways, adults build these skills in the same way. We just don't tend to call it play. We call it, we're going to go visit a friend, or we're going to go hang out, or we call it book club, right? So that's where we go to hang out and talk about stuff, right? Usually it has nothing to do with the book, but that's where we're having those interactions. Other examples for adults, and maybe young kids too, frankly, might include formal and informal mental health supports. And for older ones, might be substance use treatment, but there may be infant mental health services and other counseling services and health education opportunities. It can also look like engagement in peer-to-peer support. So some of you talked about that, based on similar life experiences, like a parenting class or an anger management class or a veteran support group. Now I'm going to put on another hat that I've had during the pandemic, which is to talk about self-care. I want to say that as staff, your ability to regulate your own emotions and behaviors are key to helping other people do the same. Individuals can work to be intentional in learning the skills that they need and taking advantage of opportunities to engage in personal and professional self-care. But it isn't just an inside job. It's just not something I should do by myself. So for those of you, 90 of you out there that are maybe in a leadership position, your organization should also be actively striving to provide employees with the skills and opportunities that allow them to practice self-compassion and self-care in the workplace, so that in turn, they have the capacity to practice compassion with the people that they interact with in the community. So that might include agency-wide training on stuff like we're talking about today, or professional self-care, or trauma-informed approaches on how we live and work with other people. So quickly, I'd love to hear, what do you do to promote this building block? So I love, Chelsea, for the engagement that parents go through parenting class and then will come back to provide childcare for the next group of parents. That's a beautiful example of that. What do you do to promote emotional growth? This is really kind of in your job description, right? You're helping parents learn how to teach their kids how to manage their emotions. So what do you do? Awesome. Claudia, thank you for talking about the bilingual events to make those community experiences more inclusive. Talking about advisory boards and sponsoring events at the local library. My best friend since I was 13 is the family literacy coordinator in Wichita. That would make her heart feel good that you're doing stuff at the library. Talk about mental health, give them mental health resources, right? I'm guessing you're doing different activities with them. Beautiful. Keep thinking about those things. while HOPE supports promoting access to the 4 building blocks, I want to stress it's the families in the community that you're working with that get to decide what goes into each of those buckets. So as a provider, we shouldn't be prescribing what goes into those buckets and deciding for families. So as you begin to shift how you approach your work and think about promoting that access to building blocks, I encourage you to learn more about how the families and communities define what works best for them. And so some of the questions that you can ask are things like, what types of relationships feel safe and supportive to you? So what types of relationships feel safe and supportive to you? How do they define that? How does the family or the community define a safe environment? What kinds of opportunities for social and civic engagement feel meaningful to you? Maybe I'm an introvert, and so these parenting groups don't feel good to me. Maybe it needs to be more of a one-on-one kind of. And how does the person's family and community culture support emotional growth? So in your session materials out on Whova, you'll find a handout, not only the slides, but a handout that offers suggestions for way to assess positive experiences. So if you're not asking for those things now, there's some suggestions on how you could. And you can modify that to best fit the way you do work in your organization, because everybody's different. Parent cafe, nice. Thank you for that, Gina. I love that idea. And other kinds of self-care activities that mom can do, or the kids, or the parent can do. Yeah, and talking about self-care beyond bubble bath and yoga, right? About what they can do. Boundaries are self-care. Expectations are self-care. That's a whole nother training that I do, but talking about self-care in a different way can be helpful. So as we're starting to wind up here, most of you are likely not surprised that these building blocks contribute to the health and well-being of kids and adults, because most of you would probably say this is what you're trying to teach people on a regular basis. But we often don't think about how, as a provider or as an organization, we demonstrate those concepts in our everyday practice in every part of our organization. So in offering you this framework, I'm not necessarily asking or suggesting that you add anything new to your plate unless you want to. I'm suggesting that this framework can function as a lens and as a guide for enhancing the work that you already do. So if you think about how you run a home visit meeting with a family, you can think about, how am I promoting what building blocks am I promoting and how? Through the way I already do my work. And is there anything missing? The thing about HOPE is that we can, every encounter with every human, not just the people you serve, every encounter, every human, we can infuse these building blocks. So when you're talking about work, though, maybe that's starting, and maybe many of you already do this, but maybe that's starting your conversation by asking about what went well since the last time you saw the family, instead of, ugh, what kind of week did you have? What went well since the last time I saw you? If you're doing intakes and assessments, often during that time, we rely really heavily on our type 1 thinking, and we look for their problems, their deficits, their risks. We often sit and imagine what information they're not telling us. You know, I'm sure there's more to this story that they're not telling, right? The forms we use may also be focused on risk, and they guide us to use the same approach for every family. I would challenge you to use your type 2 thinking during intake and assessments and focus on the person's strengths first, asking questions from a place of curiosity, and offering affirmations and praise for what's going well. I'm not saying don't ask about risks. I'm just saying ask about strengths first. Then when you're making referrals, be intentional about the referrals you make. Consider which building blocks you give access to. And for those of you that are into mapping, you can reach out to me. I have an Excel spreadsheet that I got from HOPE that'll help you map your referral sources and what building blocks they provide access to. Then you can look for gaps in your community. And for those of you that maybe are creating or revising policies or designing programs, I recommend you take a minute to consider whether your choices in designing those policies give access to building blocks, or do they block access to those building blocks? Are we making things harder? So as you've seen, HOPE is evidence-based, but it isn't a manualized or prescriptive practice. It's a framework. It's grounded in the principles of strengths-based, family-centered, and family-led care that seeks to promote access to key positive experiences through the 4 building blocks. And that framework can be integrated into your existing models and layered into the work that you're already doing. We believe that people are resilient, and at its core, HOPE seeks to take every possible opportunity to celebrate their strengths. So as you move forward into your work, I encourage you to further engage that type 2 thinking and identify additional ways that you could be creating access to the building blocks, and thinking about any barriers that you or your clients might experience and how you might overcome those barriers, as well as any resources that you might need to be successful. So in your workshop materials in HUVA, there's a worksheet that might help you think about that. You could take it back to your teams, tell them all about what we talked about, and then use the worksheet to maybe figure out how you can be more intentional about that work in your organization. With the couple of minutes I have left, I'm happy to take questions, so please feel free to do that. But I want to point out that the HOPE National Resource Center that you see on the screen, positiveexperience.org, has an amazing library of resources that includes a wide variety of handouts that you can use with parents to talk about these building blocks in a variety of languages, and it has tools for infusing HOPE into policymaking and supervision even. So those of you that are supervisors and do reflective supervision, they have tools for supervisors and infusing HOPE into that process. They have videos that show what infusing HOPE might look like in your work. So not just hearing me talk about it, but you can see what it looks like. They have simulations of a home visiting intake. They have a simulation of HOPE-infused developmental screenings and how to do HOPE-infused referrals. And they also have an online learning hub that has learning modules that you can take to get CEUs. So those of you that need that, that's cool too, because a lot of them are free. And I encourage you to visit them often because they update their materials all the time because they're still doing research and getting more data. And the cool thing is they're even willing to customize and co-brand their stuff. So if you find a handout that you really like and you want to put a Parents as Teachers logo on it, reach out to them and they'll co-brand it with you so that you can promote your program while you're promoting HOPE. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask me. I want to say thank you for all the work that you do. Home visitors really are my heart. And Kansas families are really lucky to have you all supporting them. And I really can't wait to hear how you continue to spread this work out in your communities. So thank you so much for being here, and I'll hang out and answer any questions that might show up in HUVA, or you can unmute and ask me, either way. So thanks for being here, all 90 some of you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.
All right, we're gonna hang out for just another minute if you have questions.
Absolutely. Y'all are awesome. Thank you so much for engaging with me today. I got so excited I'm about to lose my voice, but so it's a good thing we're done. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Lori, thank you for your help today and keeping me
Thanks.
on track.
You're welcome. I'm gonna close the session now. Everybody have a good night.
See you, everybody.
Bye.